Hi everyone, welcome to episode 8 of Demand Decoded. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. We're Blend, a B2B website and demand generation agency. And today I'm joined by Rob, who's actually been on an episode before. He's senior content writer at Blend. And we'll be discussing the really interesting topic of how to master your brand's tone of voice. And to me, this is just absolutely fascinating. And, we usually have a quick chat before these events just to kind of, throw a few ideas around what we're going to say. And yeah, I mean, some of the stuff that, hopefully Rob can be on the same form, and I'm sure he will. And yeah, it's just mind blowing and really, really useful for any marketer to understand. So as we go along, please feel free to ask questions. Just pop them in the comments on LinkedIn, and then we can pick them up and discuss as we go. So yeah, please do that. Don't be shy, and we'll answer those. So I suppose, Rob, the first thing really to get into would actually be to understand, for people out there like me once upon a time, and, possibly before I joined Blend, didn't fully understand what a tone of voice was and why it's so important. So, if you can talk through that would be very useful.
Yeah, okie dokie. So the easiest way to put it is that tone of voice is quite simply like it's brand guidelines for your spoken and written word. So all the stuff that you would normally have in your design files, your colors, your fonts, all that kind of stuff. It's that, but for words and whether it's spoken or written. The part of the challenge that you find with tone of voice is being able to articulate that, and really good tone of voice documentation is a set of clear principles that extend way beyond marketing. Tone of voice documentation governs all internal comms, all external comms, the way people talk to customers, the way that you send emails to customers, how you talk to each other, how your suppliers and colleagues, all that kind of stuff, with the goal being that anybody who sees anything that's written down by you can easily be identified. Yeah, that was written by whoever. You want to, tone of voice is supposed to be instantly recognizable and consistent no matter where you find it. So that's what tone of voice basically is. And the reason why brands need it is because it is as essential as any other piece of brand guideline documentation, right? You need it for consistency. You need it to establish and maintain brand value. And, you need to create it's all part of creating an environment where people can engage with your brand on a personal level, because the way that you express yourselves online and through marketing and with customers resonates, and you want to make sure that people are feeling about you the way that you want them to, and it all comes down to kind of having a clear understanding of who you are, and then being able to express that in a way that is consistent, no matter who's writing for you, whether you have an internal team or an external team, that you're all saying the same things off the same hymn sheet. And to have that level of consistency and do it well is what makes the difference between great brands and just good brands.
Yeah, and in terms of what it is like in having a voice, I suppose it's not just a set of words in a dictionary, like things you should do here. It's more of principles of, vocabulary that you should be using. Is that right?
Well, it comes back to, it's all about it's the evolution of any kind of brand activity that you would do. So under any kind of branding exercise, you'd want to really get to the heart of understanding who you are as a business. What are you trying to do? What are your values? What are you trying to bring to the world? And how do you want people to feel when they engage with you? Like, these are all common questions that you will ask yourself as part of any kind of brand exercise. And your tone of voice documentation needs to be able to take those principles and turn them into kind of practical, easy to use articles and guidance for people to write all kinds of different things. So like you say, grammar and spelling, word choice, they're all certain things, but also how you say things, what perspectives you use, kind of how often you use the customer in your narrative. That all kind of comes into play. What you talk about, all those kinds of things. Do you have a if you have a value as a business, you need to make sure that is articulated, because generally speaking, if you can show your values rather than just tell people your values, the more people buy into those values. And when people buy into businesses, that is when you gain real brand advocacy and real retention with customers, because they feel like they're being taken on a journey with you, in the brand experience. So it's so key to that brand experience that you can't overlook it as much as people have a tendency.
Yeah. And I know, when we were having a brief chat before this, one of the key things that stood out to me that you said is like established brands almost always have a set of visual brand guidelines, but almost never have a set of, tone of voice guidelines, which are potentially just as important, if not even more important, because the written word is probably used way more often than your actual visual brand, if you think about everything that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it comes down to the perceived value of visual elements, right? You go through a branding exercise, you go to a branding agency, and they're going to hook you up with some stuff. You want to see that you're getting something for your money, and that's why so many people put stock in the kind of the visual elements of it, because it looks valuable. Right? But understanding the principles of getting to the heart of who you are as a business and being able to articulate that consistently from the day after the branding agency leaves to whenever it is that your business ends, is really, really important. Like, so many brands, sort of customers, our sort of level customers that we deal with, have really well established general brand guidelines, but they don't have any tone of voice guidelines. And even though they'll be able to tell you who they are, why they do what they do, how they like to speak, then none of that is written down, and none of that is documented in a way that is, kind of applicable to the everyday, kind of working people, from the marketing department through to any other department you're talking about. Because like I said, like, you want to be able to have your tone of voice documentation dictate how people are talking across the business, because that gives everybody a shared sense of kind of belonging within their business, in the same way that wearing a jersey or a uniform does. It's all part of that same experience. And you're never going to get to that level without being able to have documentation and guardianship over those tones of voice documentation.
Yeah, and then I suppose if you've got it documented, and why it's so important is that then when new people are coming into the business and stuff, and they're communicating to the outside world, even inside your organization, they know exactly how they should be writing and communicating, so they are in line with your brand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk a lot about how the agency relationship between customers is all about, like, we are a natural extension of your marketing department, right? But a lot of times people feel like we are their marketing department, and that isn't and shouldn't ever be true. Like, we can influence and guide and support in loads of different ways, but what we want to be able to do is set customers up so that if they go anywhere else, they can still maintain that same level of consistency. And good tone of voice documentation allows you to do that. You do it with anybody, but what they want to be able to do is be able to take that away and give it to literally anybody else, whether it be like a new starter, as you say, or you go over to a different agency and you say, like, here's our tone of voice documentation. Like, we believe it, we've done the work, here it is, go. And people should be able to just pick up and play with it. But it's so rarely really happens. And to be able to do that shows that you've got real confidence in your brand. And if you've got confidence in your brand, it's so much better received by everybody who interacts with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of creating that tone of voice, then, what are some of the key elements or factors that actually contribute to establishing a brand's tone of voice?
The most important part of your tone of voice documentation is that, because it's part of brand guidelines, it needs to be a natural reflection and extension of your visual brand. So all that work that you've done around your brand, it needs to be everything needs to be the same. So a part of any kind of branding exercise that you would do, you need to apply all those learnings naturally to the written word. So if your concept is around let's say integrating with customers, let's say, and you're a technology company, integrations is what you do, you want to make sure that your language is that of kind of integration. You need to kind of explore ways that you can express that in the same way that you would do visually. You need to be able to express that in words. So that's like the biggest part, is that it is consistent with the rest of your brand. That is really, really key.
And sorry, just to step in, so you would create the visual brand before a tone of voice, right?
Not always. Generally, these things happen kind of together because, like I said, the principles of where all that is an output. Like the where you need to be spending your time and effort is to be putting in to understanding who you are, why you do what you do, and being able to express that into the world in the way that you want to. Like those, what the bits that sit behind that, the stakeholders that you need to engage with, the workshops that you need to do to kind of unpick and understand and discover all that information, is the same whether it's for visual or for tone of voice. The reason that it's kind of, I say that it needs to be a natural extension of your visual brand is that so many, normally with a lot of customers, they will have done all their visual work already, and then you just need to make sure that it extends out, because there are a lot of things visually that can complement, kind of words really nicely. So like if visually, for example, you use a lot of kind of soft curves and like looping colors and pastels and things like that, you want to be using kind of like softer, kind of like more flowing language. Whereas if your brand is very kind of looks very sort of arrows and silver sharpness and that kind of thing, you want your words to be kind of pointy and clipped and sharp, so that they reflect each other. So there are loads of ways you can do it, but ultimately you need to make sure that it is consistent, and it all comes back to what your brand values are.
Yeah. Anything else in terms of the contributions and elements that go into the tone of voice?
It does help if you've got a clear understanding of like your proposition and your values as a business. Like I said, there's a lot of work that needs to go into that, and being able to say with confidence what those things are is super helpful for establishing your tone of voice. And you kind of, it's all about, like I said, knowing where you came from and being able to articulate that and sort of understand why you get up in the morning and why your business gets up in the morning and does it. All that classic brand stuff, right? And then the next step of that is being able to be like, right, okay, so what does that mean for any normal sentence we would write as part across our business? What does that say for any kind of campaign tagline that we're going to use in the future? What does that say to our email copy? How do we sign off emails? Like if you get it down to that level, then you're doing good.
Yeah. Are we kind regards or are we thanks?
Exactly. And it says a lot of who you are as a business, and you see that good brands do it. It makes it make it look so effortless when they do it, but there's so much kind of guardianship and editorial that goes into maintaining that craft, because, like I said, it's all about maintaining that consistency, and that is the key element, really.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you've spoken to all the people that matter in your business to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve, so that everybody feels that they've engaged with the process. But none of that is uncommon than we would do with any other piece of sort of brand documentation. But it's you want to make sure that everybody is kind of bought into how you're saying what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose in terms of people to buy into, probably the most important people are your buyers and your target audience, right? So it's like, how do brands actually go about determining that they're on the right lines and creating the right tone of voice that aligns with their target audience and will, hit the right notes with them, to make sure it kind of, impacts the overall brand image?
It's a tricky one, because establishing your brand is so much of it is based in yourself, right?
Yeah.
You have to be really navel gazing to get your brand right. A lot. There is always a contribution, right, that comes in from the outside world. How do we want to position ourselves in the market, and how do we want to position ourselves against customers and that kind of thing? But ultimately, it's all about you and how you reflect out into that world. So, as part of your normal activity, you might look at the market and say, our customers are looking for brands that do this, that, and the other thing. We want brands that are trustworthy. They want brands that are professional, friendly, and approachable, right? But what you need to do is kind of take all that information that you know about your customer and think, okay, well, how do we do that? What are our key turns of phrase? How do we articulate those ideas our way? And that's the difference, because all businesses want to be trustworthy, all businesses want to be approachable, right? But it's all about how you go about expressing that approachability, how you go about expressing that trust, that makes you that just helps define who you are as a brand and how that is then expressed through your tone of voice. You need to understand your buyer to a level where you know what is going to stimulate them to take action when it comes to tone of voice. So the words that you put in, the words that you choose, need to be able to do that. So you need to have a natural kind of affinity understanding for your buyer, so that you can get them to take the actions that you want to take them at the kind of the very base level, not just in the, they want this kind of call to action because they want to engage with this type of content. It's kind of like, these are the buzzwords that are going to really grab them.
Nice.
You kind of the market is an interesting place, and part of the other part of tone of voice, in addition to being consistent, is about being able to be immediately identifiable, right? You need to be able to stand out in your market, and there is a fine line to be gained between conforming to expectations and pushing the envelope. Some businesses want to push the envelope, other businesses prefer to stay the course because they know and that their buyers won't buy into that, right? That's something you hear all the time. You'd be like, oh, I love what you've written there, but our customers, they don't like that, they don't engage with that, but then you've had others that really like it. You want to kind of really make sure that you are kind of like steering your tone of voice in the right direction at the campaign level, to make sure that you are hitting the right sort of notes. One of the interesting things that
I think you're going to say it now.
One of the interesting things that we've learned is that you can tell a lot about how you want to pitch your tone of voice by comparing the age of your buyer against the age of the industry in which they're working, right? So young persona buyers in established industries like finance, for example, are more likely to engage with disruptive tone of voice and things that are going to push, kind of push the envelope, than kind of older buyers who exist in older industries, right? Because older buyers and more traditionalist buyers are used to, they expect to see a certain load of, a certain set of things said in a certain way, and they're looking to be met with that expectation. They know what they like and they trust it, right? That is a very much undervalued approach to, particularly in B2B, to the buyer's cycle. Like we all say we want to excite and engage and all the rest of it. But like sometimes it's knowing your buyer really well and giving them what they expect, right? So that does play into it. But like generally speaking, like if you're looking at, if you're working in, like I said, in finance space or any of the kind of like older industries, and you've got young buyers, so you've got a new generation of, C-suite entities coming in, they're going to look for more disruptive language. They want to look for something that sounds like they sound, kind of like somebody who's trying to disrupt, so you can have a business that could be 106 years old, but you could create a campaign that kind of like speaks to these, this sort of younger buyer, and you can kind of like tailor it to what they need. But like ultimately you want to be exploring that at the campaign level, less so than the brand level, and how you translate between the two is a key factor of what your documentation needs to show. It's going to be like, okay, for this persona, we write in these ways, or on this channel, we write in these ways in order to meet these specific sets of goals, whether it be for a persona or whatever. I think when it comes to making sure that you've aligned things in an accurate way, it always helps to get inspiration from outside your own industry, right? Because sometimes, take the financial sector, right? There's a lot of fintech startups out there who are really disrupting things with, kind of SaaS-like and startup-like buzzwords and terminology that loads of other industries are taking as taking inspiration from. So then you can see it in the security market, for example. There's a lot of people who've looked at that SaaS model and said, okay, we're not just going to copy that model, we're going to copy that language, and create this idea of a dynamic, flexible, agile business, even though they've been in business for donkey's years, right? It's all about like how you perceive and how you transform people's approaches to that. The insurance industry is another great example, right? Where you can see where they are both influencing other industries and also have been influenced by other industries. It's an interesting opportunity if you are trying to figure out like where your tone of voice needs to go, is to kind of look at kind of the people that inspire you outside of your own industry, because otherwise we end up in a constant echo chamber of never changing language, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because on last week's episode, Jasmine and Phil were talking about website UX, and that was all about not breaking out of the norm, right? It's like actually copying somebody is probably a good thing. Like, go by the best practices, don't push the boundaries, give buyers what they expect. But when we're talking about brand and tone of voice, actually, you want to be unique, because this is your opportunity to really show your value, your visions, your personality, and stand out. Like, there's nothing really that should be reflective of another business, because you're unique.
Absolutely, absolutely. We talk about a lot about, in a lot of sectors, about customer experience, right? And buyers want to feel like they're a part of something. They want to feel like they're on, whether it be the B2B or the B2C space. They want to feel like they're engaging with a brand that resonates with them, that makes them feel something. And good tone of voice helps people feel things, right? And you want to make, you want people to feel stimulated by the things that you say, so that they feel like they're a part of something really special. That's where, like, the real top tier brands, why you get such strong brand advocacy from people like Apple, for example, than you do for people like Ericsson, right?
Yeah.
Or Sony, right? Perfectly good manufacturers of electronic telephones, but people buy the Apple because the brand is so good, and it makes you feel like you're part of that world. And the way they do that is by creating copy and creative that is stimulating to people. And you need to be able to stand out. Like I said, it is a fine line to tread, because depending on your buyer, like, you might pitch it a little bit too hard one way or the other at the campaign level. But, like, generally speaking, you need to understand who you are and be honest about it, and then go and own it in the world in the way that you want to.
Yeah, you've got to hit that sweet spot.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So in terms of, right, we've gone through what you need to establish, like, why you need a tone of voice, what it is, how you kind of bring things together to establish it. And in terms of how you actually maintain that consistent tone of voice across all of your channels, social, email, website, email, offline marketing, sales, like, I could go on forever. Basically, maintaining that consistent tone of voice across all of these platforms, how do you go about doing that and maintaining that consistency across the board?
It is incredibly challenging, and most of the time, most of the stories that you hear is that we did brand and tone of voice a few years ago. We had this wonderful documentation. Somebody put it in a drawer and never opened it again, and it got never used. Right? Classic. Right? You hear it all the time. You spend all this money on your brand work, and then you never actually use it. And you need to have documented guidelines and make sure that everybody can see them and that they're used on a regular basis, right? You want it to be the most looked at page in your conference, right? That is the goal of tone of voice documentation, right? Because then you know that people are looking at it and they're using it properly. Like, documentation, first and foremost, that is absolutely key. Where you save that or how you keep that, that is obviously up to you. But having that written down is so important, because again, it's about maintaining consistency, so that if you have somebody in your business who is part of runs your creative and then leaves, you want to be able to make sure you can still talk about your brand. It's not always in one person's head, right? But you need to be able to make sure that not only is it documented, but that it's also championed by somebody. You need people at both an editorial level, but also as a cultural business cultural level. You want people to be owning that tone of voice and being there to bang the drum for tone of voice and remind everybody that we say things in a certain way. This is what we need to be doing. You need to make somebody whose entire job is making sure that all the marketing copy, all the communications that go out into the business, you need somebody whose job it is to look at that and make sure that it complies with tone of voice in the same way that it complies with ISO, in the same way that it complies with any other kind of set of guidelines that you hold yourself to as a business, right? You need to have somebody who owns it.
And that doesn't need to be one person, right? I know you're saying somebody there, but that could be a group of people like that own it. As long as some group of people, like individuals, take ownership of that tone of voice and are the champions and are strict, I suppose, on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And normally within a business, it's going to be the marketing department, right? But you need to be able to engage with all areas of the business to say, look, hey, I see that you're working on a presentation there. I see you work on something there. It's sales, classic with sales, right? I see you working on this pitch for a client. Just run it past my desk. I'd like to make some tweaks to make sure that it consists with tone of voice. You're not going to write it for them. You're not going to rewrite it at all. But just to make sure that it's going out with, the kind of the level of quality that is expected, because the salesperson might not know if your business is big, or they might have overlooked stuff because they've got other things to be doing. It's always somebody else's job, right? But being able to have the confidence to go out there, even to the C-suite, and say, look, I see you're doing your your earnings report for this year. Let me just go through that quickly for you.
Yeah.
And just make the tweaks so that even then, the shareholders and the board they see the brand, because it's so overlooked. Like this, the internal comms aspect of it is hugely overlooked. So you need people to own it and champion it. And like I said, normally that will be marketing. If you are an agency like we are, normally it sits with the copy department. But obviously it will vary.
Yeah, and I think on actually running it past people and stuff, like if you have a tone of voice and then you're getting people across the entire business to run it past somebody, when it comes back to you, you're like, wow, like that's bang on. And like you see the difference, because I've had it, like even now at Blend, I'll write a blog or whatever, or a piece of content, run it past our content team, and it will come back with all of these changes from our copy team, which I expect now. It's quite sad really to look at, but amazing, like really to look at when it comes back, the impact that tone of voice document has. And although I try to stick to it as much as I can, having these people that champion it and know it inside out is really useful.
It is. And one thing I would touch on here is that to think about, because of the impact of AI generated content, authority and trust is becoming more and more important in how people kind of engage with content, right? So there's an argument to say that tone of voice makes you look homogenized, right? So the way that you would write a piece of content is different from the way that somebody else would write a piece of content, but the fact that you've written it your way gives you that unique authenticity that kind of puts more gravitas into the fact that this isn't just a piece that's written by a company. This is a piece that's written by Dan, and Dan knows things because he's trustworthy and he's got accreditations and experience and he's sharing his views. That is the argument to say we shouldn't have tone of voice documentation because everybody should speak with their own voice. But that is a poor argument, because what is authentic is the content that is in there, the views, the opinions, the perspectives, the value of that content, not how it is written. How it is written should always be owned by and be governed by some kind of editorial oversight through tone of voice documentation and brand guardianship, and let the learnings and the experience speak through it. You shouldn't just be like, well, we need to sound authentic, so therefore, write how you want to, because then you end up in a situation where you look massively inconsistent.
Yeah, the learning and point of view is unique, right? But not, the voice doesn't have to be.
Yeah, exactly. And then as you get up to kind of your bigger businesses where you are, your content exists in loads of different places. You engage PR, you bring articles and papers and guest blogs and that kind of stuff. It gets harder and harder to maintain that level of consistency once your brand goes out the door, and even harder when you change things internally and you've got stuff all over the place that needs to be updated and changed and all the rest of it. So that's where kind of good content management systems and technology automation can really help you. Stuff like sort of contentfuls and all that kind of stuff of the world can kind of help you manage where your content is in the world and be able to tweak it all from one source. So that's really, really important, because you don't want to, again, when you get into the big business level, you need to know where your assets are so that you can replace them and update them on a regular basis. But the bigger you get and the more places that they are, the harder that becomes. So again, that becomes a whole management piece in and of itself that really has benefited, certainly in the last 5 years, from having some really nice automated kind of HubSpot-esque kind of technologies that can help kind of manage that process. But ultimately, it comes down to strong documentation and really strong guardianship.
Yeah. So in terms of that documentation, I think you were going to share what the kind of creation and documentation process looks like using Blend as the example. So if I add this,
Oh,
you should now be able to control that. And basically, yeah, give people, although people listening to the pod will just have to go and watch this on YouTube or something. But basically, you can just talk through it and visualize it to people.
Okay, so this is a very basic example of, and this is just one tiny slice of a much bigger picture here, but as a basic understanding of what your tone of voice should look like and what it should contain. Essentially, it's understanding who you know, what assets, what values you want to bring to the world, and then expressing them, and then writing it in a way that is useful for people. Because the other thing about tone of voice documentation is that it's a practical piece of documentation, right? People need to be able to use it. So what we've done here for Blend is explore what our brand, if Blend were a person, what attributes we would have, and then create an example of that kind of content, and then highlighting where we're showing how we are expressing those values, those elements. So, for example, we say that we're impartial, so we make sure that we say that demand generation is but one of many marketing approaches, even though we think it is the best and the one that businesses should be looking at these days, because lead scoring sucks, or whatever it is you like to say. And all that kind of, and giving people clear examples of what good tone of voice looks like is really, really important to getting people to learn and understand what they should be writing and how they should be writing it. So, in addition to our attributes, our traits, we also have some general guidance on how we approach things and how we position ourselves and how we write about certain things. So, for example, here we use positive appeal. We speak to people, not jobs, that kind of stuff. And then with some examples in writing tone of voice documentation, this, not that, is a really good way of kind of structuring your values, to give people very clear examples to say, no, so we write like this, but it's like we write like this, but not like that. And that gives people very clear guidance.
Yeah, that should be emphasized, really, because that's such an important way to visually communicate, what you're trying to get across. Actually, instead of just saying, do this, showing what you shouldn't do is almost more effective sometimes than actually getting people to do it the right way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I found that anyway when I was looking at this.
Yeah, because it's really important, to kind of give people examples. And what I've done for some of these examples is to kind of pull on existing copy and things that exist in our ecosystem of content and use them as direct examples. So it's key to to that way people can see contextually that this is it's not just any old example, an example that is applicable to what we do every day in our business. And then you can do this with all kinds of different in different attributes and elements, but to compare again how you sound, and how you structure things, and how your tone of voice is articulated by creating nice, easy to understand sliding scales of stuff. So for example, we use formality and flow, and so we would say, okay, well, where do we sit on that boundary? If formality, if one was, I'm applying for a job at the Houses of Parliament, and 10 is, I'm drunk and talking to my friends, where do we sit on that scale? And then how do you articulate that? And it's important to be able to have in your mind, kind of what examples of that are, to help people really understand where you're coming from. So, for Blend, we sit on the informal side of formal. We like to reflect our charm, but we stay professional, right? We aren't overly kind of chatty and overly friendly with clients. But again, it's because we are a B2B based business, and we know that we get better relationships out of our clients if we maintain a level of professionalism that sits beyond kind of being overly formal. And then our flow, we are easy to understand but deep dive into complex subjects. That's a very nothing phrase in and of itself, but when you see it as a 7, when it comes to punchy sentences to long run-on sentences, you can it gives you a better understanding of what that actually means, which essentially, to put it in Phil's words, is answer the question and then elaborate, that is a reflection of that. So, and we always want to be saying a thing and then expanding on it. Even the way that I
So
speak is very much like that. But
that would be the reason, right, for being on one side of that scale to the other. Like when would you choose to be on 1 of flow compared to 10 of flow? Like how do brands figure that out, where to be on that scale?
ultimately, it comes back around to values, right? If you want to be direct, no nonsense, no fluff, all killer, no filler type brand, then you put yourself as a 1, and sometimes it's an expression of the personalities involved in the room. A lot of times it feels like that when it comes to when you do these kinds of workshops, these brand workshops with people. It really comes down to that kind of stuff. So one we did for one of our clients recently, it was very much a kind of like what you saw was what you got with him. He called a spade, and when we explore with him, what is the kind of content? If you are your own ideal buyer, what's the kind of content that really engages with you? And he was like, something that really rocks the boat, and it really speaks very directly. So then we're like, okay, cool. So slap you in at a 2, or 1 or a 2, and then test it. Because this is the other thing, and when you do it with clients, it's really important to, once you've identified that they want to be this, then test them with it. Be like, okay, right, here's your homepage. Here's that version of the tone of voice that you've got. Are you prepared to stand by that? Because a lot of times it's all very well saying it in the meeting, and then immediately people are like, oh, people are actually going to say that. Maybe we should hedge. But sometimes, a lot of the time, actually, people stay true to what they believe. And seeing it up front is a really nice way of being able to express that. But it all starts here in this kind of work.
Yeah, so, that's really useful.
Beyond this, you then go into looking at like how you write for certain people and what kind of grammar and things that you use and all that kind of stuff, and it goes on and on and on as a whole piece. Again, it's not just a one. You can boil it down to one page if you want to create a handout or something like that. Ideally, you should be able to do that, but you need to be comprehensive. Like, how do you spell the word e-commerce, for example? Do you spell it e-commerce with a lowercase c, or do you spell it with no hyphen and a capital C? All that kind of stuff all needs to go into your documentation, in addition to not just the words that we use, the words that we don't use, but then how do we spell those words, and all that kind of stuff needs to all be added in. This kind of stuff, glossaries and all that kind of stuff.
I think we must have a good 8 pages in here that's like, use an Oxford comma, and don't do this and do that. So it is a bit of a beast, but definitely worthwhile, and having this kind of overview of things really allows anybody to pick it up and at least get the gist of your tone of voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, it's all about, like I say, it's all about creating the right kind of feeling, right? Okay, whether or not you use the Oxford comma or you put a comma in one place, the only people who are going to care about that are the nittiest nitpicking people. But if you can articulate what your tone of voice is supposed to be making people feel, that usually gives lay people enough to get on and write something that is much more aligned to what your brand voice is than then kind of like making people read through reams and reams and reams of rules and regulations for how they should and shouldn't write. And then, because that nitpicky stuff, that is where brand guardianship and editorial come into play to make sure to cover all that off. But we want to be able to allow anybody to feel confident in what they're writing without having to feel they're going to have to go through checks and balances. So if you can create a feeling of friendliness, positivity, engagement, confidence, authoritativeness, intelligence, and impartiality, if you can create that feeling, how you do it with capital letters, full stops, and sentence lengths it really is the secondary aspect of it. It's all about creating the right kind of feeling, and this is what we try to articulate in our brand voice page, and then all the other pages that sit underneath it are all the full-on brand guidelines.
Yeah. So let's say people have listened to this, and they're inspired. They're going to go and create a brand tone of voice because Rob has just inspired everybody to do this, right? I hope. What are some of the specific challenges or pitfalls that people might actually face when they're coming to document this and establish their tone of voice, and how do they come battle some of them and overcome some of the challenges?
So one of the biggest challenges that you find in tone of voice, slightly less so in visual brand, although this is very common in visual brand as well, but it's bias, right? The loudest person in the room usually gets to make the call, and people get led far too easily down kind of charismatic lines, and then they end up kind of writing in the way that either they're told to or the way that they want to, because they feel their ego is the brand, as it were. That is one of the biggest challenges in terms of like creating the documentation and really nailing down the values and what it needs to be. Bias is a huge pitfall. That's where sometimes getting a third party is always really useful, because it's somebody who hasn't got a dog in the fight, right? And they can really help you understand the core of what you're trying to do as a business, and why you get up in the morning, and it can be more true to that, rather than kind of have it be polluted by influences.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
That's one of the big ones. When it comes to actually maintaining and delivering on that tone of voice, the big one is stakeholder engagement and change management, right? People don't care. Most people don't care about tone of voice, right? Particularly inside businesses. Like in marketing, people care, right?
Yeah.
Because they need to. But this is where internal comms is so important, and change management is so important. Getting people on board is really, really important. That's one of the biggest challenges is that people just don't think about it. They're busy. I get it. You need to write an email, you need to send it off to a client, you need to get back to a prospect really soon, or whatever it is, whatever the excuse is that there's never time, and you should always, I'm a writer, like I'm going to say this, but you should always give yourself the time to write, which includes putting it down, picking it up again, and looking at it again and saying, oh, actually I can change that and that could be better, and all the rest of it. Like everybody needs to do that, but they don't. So that's one of the other big challenges. The other ones, obviously are just, it just comes back around to education, right? People don't know what tone of voice is. They don't understand how their words affect other people. Like you see this in internal comms all the time, right? People saying, you get a message from somebody, through Teams, and, it's interpreted wrong because people don't really understand the choice of words that they use has an impact on people. What you say matters, in every scenario, and people don't understand the power of that. And so they don't see the value, so that's one of the other big things. And like I said, like the way to overcome these things obviously is education, right? Proper change management, be like, right, these are new tone of voice documentation. This is what it means for you in sales. This is what it means for you in accounts. This is what it means for you in, catering, wherever you are in the business.
Yeah, right? I suppose this is why it's important. This is why you should care, and why we're doing this, and why we care so much about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can't get your employees to buy into the values of your business, like what are they doing here, and what are you doing there, right? At the end of the day, that's what it is. Like you want to hire people who share your values. Like if they don't, then they shouldn't be there in the first place. Ideally, you want to be able to get them to get on board, get enthusiastic about living your brand, because all of your employees should be brand advocates for you, and if they can't get on board, then you need to work really hard at getting them on board. Change management is so important to get people to buy into this kind of stuff, and creating kind of personalized or specific training and guidance for people. So it's like, okay, hey, you work in this department, this is how you need to be writing, this is how your tone of voice needs to be sounding when you talk to people. These are the kind of things you need to ascribe to, all that kind of stuff. And then people feel like, oh, okay, this isn't just marketing's thing, this is our thing, these are our rules that we need to play by. So when you're in strategy, for example, like they write reports, they have a set of guidelines that they need to stick to. They know they need to not just present data, they need to look at the data, look at the story that is telling them, create a narrative, and then write in a way that tells a narrative story while also being to the point and direct enough to be able to make people understand what is in that report. It's tricky, it's hard, but the way that they do it is completely different to the way that our sales department does it, right? And the way the goals that they need to do. So it's always different, but it all comes from the same place, and it's all telling the same things about us being friendly, intelligent, and authoritative, right? In our way. So
even though the language and purpose behind the content might be different, the actual overall voice is consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's all about consistency.
Yeah. So in terms of like, before we start wrapping things up, any good examples that people can go away and look at, dig a bit deeper in terms of brands that have really mastered their tone of voice, maybe even B2C and B2B? I don't know.
So there are a couple that I like. A lot of these are, I mean, I don't want to say Innocent Drinks and Apple because everybody says that when we have tone of voice conversations, right? Everybody says that. But ones that I like in the B2B and B2B spaces, I mean, I really like Monzo Bank and Starling Bank. Like we talked about fintechs earlier, right? Starling Bank's really good. Like their tone of voice is very clever, and to the point where they even explain where Starling Bank comes from and how that is a reflection of their values, and then how those values reflect in their content is really interesting. So I think they do a really good job. Forecast, I think, do a really good job of standing out in the market. If compared to other project management tools that are out there, I think they do a really good job. I love Asana. They have a great brand anyway, but their brand voice is really good. And you see, the interesting thing about their brand voice is that you see it in an app as well, which is really cool to see. So the stuff you see on their website and stuff you see in their marketing is the same as you see in their product, which is such a huge win for brand advocacy, right? Because you use it every day, you see it every day, you feel it every day, and then you identify it immediately every time. Like they're really, really, really good. There is another one that I wasn't going to share, but I think I am going to share. So if we can bring up my screen again.
Yeah.
As a connoisseur of other people's style guides and tone of voice, I think that MailChimp nail it, right? MailChimp style guide. This is available. Anybody can go to this page in MailChimp's website and look at their style guide, right? And it's accessible as all that, and it goes through everything from tone of voice, how to write in certain ways, grammar mechanics, all this kind of stuff. Like this is the level to which we should be aiming for with tone of voice documentation.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Really available to people, And so if you have a minute or 25 minutes, go read that. It's brilliant. It really, really is brilliant. I strongly recommend it. And so many brands now are talking, are writing content, building content around their tone of voice and their style and how they managed to get to where they've been. Like not just people who've done rebrands either, but like new upcoming brands. It's part of their story to tell people exactly where they're coming from and why. So if you can create some exciting tone of voice guidelines, some really cool style guides, some really good brand guidelines, you can build a whole narrative around that to get people to understand why you do what you do and how you do it, and again create some brand advocacy before that is content that you can then use to kind of get people to to raise brand awareness and get people really engaged in the brand and really say, oh, that's why, and get people to start being a bit more critical of the things that they look at and read, which is really exciting, I think.
Yeah, amazing. Cool. So one of the things that I want to start doing at the end of each of these episodes is kind of giving the Demand Decoded listeners some final words of wisdom. So are there any final words, phrases, or anything else that you would give to listeners who are trying to define their own brand's tone of voice?
If you want to do tone of voice well, you need to be true to yourself and commit to consistency.
Yeah.
That's it. Like if you can do that, then no matter what you choose to say or how you choose to say it, you're gonna be good. You're gonna be much better than most other businesses out there, right? It's all about knowing who you are, where you come from, why you get up in the morning, and then committing to being consistent about telling that story. In the same way, every day, rain or shine.
Amazing.
So, there you
go. Thanks so much, Rob. That was absolutely fascinating. So let's wrap it up.
Did we have any questions? Any Q&As?
There weren't, no. So we'll wrap it up. And if you have any questions, though, about tone of voice, just probably drop Rob a message. And I'm sure he would love to talk all things tone of voice with you. Don't message me. Message Rob.
I love tone of voice. It's my favorite thing.
Sweet. Okay, let's wrap it up there. And just follow the Blend LinkedIn page to join any future events live. But you can obviously watch previous episodes back on YouTube or listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Just search for Demand Decoded and you'll see it there. So thanks for tuning in and cheers, Rob. That was great.
No worries. Thanks for having me.